Welcome, everyone, especially visitors, to this online gathering of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bowling Green. We are a welcoming congregation. Whoever you are, however you identify, wherever you come from, and whoever you love, you are welcome here. Our Sunday services are different each week, so that we can honor and learn from our wide array of traditions and beliefs. Though we each walk our own path, here in this place, now at this time, we journey together as one community. For Unitarian Universalists, the flaming chalice is a symbol of the light of learning and the love of our community. As our congregation's chalice is lit, you're welcome to join in singing Rise Up, O Flame.
Rise, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you. Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened.
Please join in singing our opening song, Come Sing a Song with Me.
All right, hymn number 346, Come Sing a Song with Me. Come sing a song with me, come sing a song with me, come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind, and I'll bring you home when home is
We will now let the singing bowl lead us into silence, meditation, and prayer.
As mentioned earlier, Unitarian Universalists have a wide array of beliefs, and the speakers at our services come from many traditions. Here to share his thoughts today is John E. Downing. Dr. Downing attended medical school at the University of Louisville, and he has been serving Bowling Green as an ophthalmologist since 1971. He is on the clinical faculty at Vanderbilt and the University of Louisville. For the past 30 years, John has gone on teaching missions with Project Orbis International. He is also a father to 7 children, 10 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren, and has been a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bowling Green since 1972. Please welcome our beloved member, John E. Downing.
Good morning. I want to talk this morning about some things that have been happening pretty much under most people's radar and have caused some major changes around the world over the last couple of hundred years. In the news, our information about the world is very skewed. It's almost always about something bad or unusual things. Accidents, earthquakes, fire, murder, lawlessness. The news folks say if it bleeds, it leads, because that gets our attention. And we can see things that happen anywhere in the world on our TV, often within minutes of the times that it happens. We get politicians constantly trying to make us afraid of their opponents, claim that the country's going to ruin if we elect their opponent, and do everything they can to demonize each other. Good news, things that happen every day, are not usually very interesting and don't get covered. Now we're in the middle of this very disruptive pandemic. We hear bad news about it all the time, like, oh, there were 100 kids at a summer camp who tested positive. Nothing said about whether any of them were sick enough to need to go to the hospital, which they probably weren't. There's almost no risk with COVID if you're less than 50 years old and healthy. If you're over 50 and have diabetes, lung, or heart disease, it can be serious. Take sensible precautions, and the risk goes up every decade that we are older. Half the deaths have been in people over 80, almost half from people in nursing homes. There are some very positive things that have been going on over time that we usually are not hearing anything about. Dr. Hans Rosling is a Swedish physician. He worked in Africa as a physician for a number of years and then worked with UNICEF for a number of years. And he got interested in what's going on over time and has collected vast amounts of data about changes in the world. I'm going to show you some of his videos and test your knowledge a bit. You may know less about the world than you think you do. So on the questions, please make a note of your answers to each question, and then we'll see if you get more correct answers than chimpanzees do choosing bananas randomly. And I have to warn you, most people don't. Question 1. In the last 20 years, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has A, almost doubled, B, remained more or less the same, C, almost halved. Which do you choose?
This shows the percent in extreme poverty in the world. 0%, 50%, and 100%. And each uprise here represents 10 years. Here we are at 1900, and this is where we are today. Now, I'm going to start all the way back 200 years ago, the time of Napoleon, 1800. What was the percentage of extreme poverty in the world then? Staggering, 85%. Only a few was out of extreme poverty. And then came the Industrial Revolution. And did it improve? Not much. 1850, it was just down here to 80%. And 1900, it came down to 70%. And then further on to 1950 here. This is when I was born, just before. I was 2 years old here. 55%. And we have to go all the way to 1970 to reach 50%. The year when half the world population was out of extreme poverty and half of it was still in extreme poverty. And then, only in my adult life has it started to drop a little faster. And I stop here at 1990, when it was down to 35%. Now, this year is not the first time the United Nations put a target, a goal for extreme poverty. The former goal was to halve the extreme poverty from 1990 up to 2015, where we are now. And many people at that time said, that's mad, that will never work. So it's very exciting for you now to learn, where is the last estimate? Where is 2015? And the estimate is, I have to put a special stick here. Because it's here, 2015. This is where we are now. And the estimate is 12. 12. Let me show you this fantastic trend here, how it went down from 85%, coming slowly down, a little faster down, and then down here. Was the goal achieved? Well, it's not easy to measure extreme poverty. There is an uncertainty, but there is no doubt that this trend is fast going down and that the last goal was indeed achieved. However, I'm a statistician, and I know that just because you see a trend like that, that doesn't mean that it will continue in the same direction. It may level off like this, because the last lap is often the toughest. But on the other hand, you can see that it's not impossible to achieve this new goal, to end extreme poverty altogether. I'm going to show you where extreme poverty has been and how it has decreased. This is the world, and here are the population back in 1800 in each of the regions, in total 1 billion. Here is the yardstick of income. And I'm going to put down these people to show their incomes. First Europe, and they spread out here, and then Americas on top of that, then come Africa, and on top of it, the most populous region, Asia, including Australia. And as I showed you before, almost all people there were living in extreme poverty, on all regions in the world. Now, I'm going to show you what has happened. I start the world, and look, with the Industrial Revolution, the population grew here and the incomes expanded here, mainly because of increased income in Europe and America. And then in the 20th century, population continued to grow here and incomes increased even more here. And that changed the whole pattern of the world. It became a divided world. The worldview you grew up with the rich West here and with poor Africa and Asia here. But in the 1980s, the amazing growth of China and the other tiger economy in Asia and India, they start to get out of poverty. They close this gap and they are coming over on this side, and the shape of the world changed again. And look now, Africa is following. I call them the lion economies of Africa. And here we are today in a completely new shape of the world. For those of you who still think about the world as the rich and the poor, I'm going to give you a new concept. I'm going to give you a new term, the middle. What we have to do is to look at those who recently came from extreme poverty and into the middle to learn what does it take to go from here to there.
So, you see that this change in severe poverty over 220 years has gone from 85% of people being in extreme poverty until about 1800, living on the equivalent of $2 a day or less, in constant risk of starvation, disabling injury, illness, accidents, and often wondering where their next meal is going to come from, and frequently not having to get every meal every day. Now, there are a number of TV shows and movies that are about medieval times that show people in very fancy balls and dinners with lots of food and servants. Well, those folks are the 15%. The other 85% you don't see except for the few servants that they have. And even the richer people had to put up with filthy streets with bad air, open sewers, and unsafe water. So now, 90% are above that starvation level, and that's in the past 2 centuries. Now let's look at the distribution of those changes.
So let's move over to another way here in which we could display the distribution in the world of the income. This is the world distribution of income of people. $1, $10, or $100 per day. There's no gap between rich and poor any longer. This is a myth. There's a little hump here. But there are people all the way. And if we look where the income ends up, the income, this is 100% of world's annual income, and the richest 20%, they take out of that about 74%, and the poorest 20%, they take about 2%. And this shows that the concept developing countries is extremely doubtful. We sort of think about aid, like these people here giving aid to these people here. But in the middle, we have most of the world population, and they have now 24% of the income. We heard it in other forms. And who are these? Where are the different countries? I can show you Africa. This is Africa. 10% of the world population, most in poverty. This is OECD. The rich country, the country club of the UN, and they are over here on this side, and quite an overlap between Africa and OECD. And this is Latin America. It has everything on this earth, from the poorest to the richest in Latin America. And on top of that, we can put East Europe, we can put East Asia, and we put South Asia. And how did it look like if we go back in time to about 1970? Then there was more of a hump. And we have most who lived in absolute poverty were Asians. The problem in the world was the poverty in Asia. And if I now let the world move forward, you will see that while population increase, there are hundreds of millions in Asia getting out of poverty, and some others get into poverty. And this is the pattern we have today, and the best projection from the World Bank is that this will happen. And we will not have a divided world. We will have most people in the middle. Of course, it's a logarithmic scale here.
Our species, Homo sapiens, has been around essentially unchanged for at least 200,000 years. That is more than 1 million generations. And for all but the last 15 or so generations, 85% of people income in the world was equivalent to $2 a day or less. Of course, they didn't have dollars, but what they could make with what tools they had. About 1800, incomes began to rise. In the last 20 years, 2000 to now, the proportion of people in extreme poverty has halved from 20% to 10%, even with a doubling almost of the world population. Now, this is largely due to the ideas of the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, education, innovation, globalization, and market economies. So, answer to question 1, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has almost halved. Question 2, what is average life expectancy in the world today? Is it 50 years, 60 years, or 70 years? So how has it changed? Life expectancy in the hunter-gatherer communities average between 20 and 25 years from examination of bones. And that's for almost all of the 200,000 years we've been around. Agriculture began to be developed about 10,000 years ago. People had a more stable amount of food available, but still life expectancy was no more than 30 years. Now, let's see what's happened in the past 200 years.
First, an axis for health, life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400,000, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up, Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics.
This is a chart of life expectancy from 1543, that is in Great Britain, where average life expectancy was about 35 years. Then they had a pandemic which dropped it 10 years on average, and then it's up and down, but still below 40 years until a little over 1800, and then it starts to rise. The pink line is the United States, and then other countries start to pick up, and until in 2015, Japan and South Korea have life expectancies of over 80 years. Ours is about 79, and even Congo, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, it's over 60. Something you're probably not at all aware of, fortunately. In 1800, 40% of children died before they were 5. That's hard to imagine now. And it didn't change a lot until about 1900, when we started to get better sanitation, cleaner water, sewage, and then vaccines and antibiotics, until in 2017, it was down to about 5%. That's still 15,000 kids a day dying by age 5. The United States in 1950, the child mortality rate for the first 5 years was a little over 3.5%. It is now less than 1%, about 0.6%. That's a big improvement, but still a tragedy when you lose a small child. So answer to question 2, what's average life expectancy in the world today? 70 years. Question 3, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? Is it 20%, 40%, or 80%? Now, you need to realize vaccines have to be kept refrigerated until they're given. There are lots of places in the developing world where they do not have refrigeration and often do not have electricity. So what would you think that, how many of the world's 1-year-olds have been vaccinated now against one disease? This is a chart showing that in 1980, only about 20% of kids were vaccinated. That has steadily risen until now over 80% all over the world have been vaccinated for at least one of the childhood diseases. And the childhood diseases, measles, mumps, chickenpox, malaria, are the reasons for the high mortality rate 200 years ago, and still kill a lot of kids worldwide. So, how many of the world's 1-year-old children have been vaccinated against some disease? 80%, which is an amazing public health success. Question 4. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? Is it 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? This shows that in 1970, almost 79% of men had completed primary school, but only 69, almost 70% of women, girls. There was a lot said about that time, pointing out how it's a very good idea to get more girls in school because when they get jobs, they spend their money better on their home and family. So in 2016, this is what it is. Less than 0.5% difference. The girls have really caught up a lot, and they have over 9 years of average time in school. Question 4. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years. Whoops, I'm sorry. Yeah. There is a website that the Roslings started, well, www.gapminder.org, if you want to look up some of these figures. Hans Rosling died several years ago. His son Ola and Ola's wife Anna have continued his work evaluating changes over the world, and they have quite a collection. And the next video shows Ola, Hans' son, on how not to be ignorant when evaluating questions about the world.
We need to turn our intuition into strength again. We need to be able to generalize. So now I'm going to show you some tricks where the misconceptions are turned around into rules of thumb. Let's start with the first misconception. This is very widely spread. Everything is getting worse. You heard it, you thought it yourself, okay? The other way to think is most things improve, okay? So you're sitting with a question in front of you and you're unsure, you should guess improve, okay? Don't go for the worse. That will help you score better on our tests, okay? That was the first one. Okay, there are rich and poor and the gap is increasing. It's a terrible inequality. Yeah, it's an unequal world, but when you look at the data, it's one hump, okay? If you feel unsure, go for the most people are in the middle, okay? That's going to help you get the answer right. Now, the next preconceived idea is first, countries and people need to be very, very rich to get the social development like girls in school and be ready for natural disasters. No, 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 that's wrong. Look, that huge hump in the middle already have girls in school. So if you are unsure, go for the majority already have this, like electricity and girls in school, these kind of things. It's only rules of thumb. So of course they don't apply to everything, but this is how you can generalize. Let's look at the last one. Yes, this is a good one. Sharks are dangerous, okay? No, well, yes, but but they are not so important in the global statistics. That's what I'm saying. I'm very afraid of sharks. So as soon as I see a question about things I'm afraid of, which might be earthquakes, other religions, maybe I'm afraid of terrorists or sharks, anything that make me feel, assume you're going to exaggerate the problem, okay? That's a rule of thumb. Of course, there are dangerous things that are also great. Sharks kill very, very few. That's how you should think. With these 4 rules of thumb, you could probably answer better than the chimps, because the chimp cannot do this. They cannot generalize these kind of rules, okay? And hopefully we can turn your world around and we're going to beat the chimps, okay? That's a systematic approach. Now the question, is this important? Okay, yeah, it's important to understand poverty, extreme poverty, and how to fight it, and how to bring girls in school. When we realize actually it's succeeding, we can understand it. But is it important for everyone else who cares about the rich end of this scale? I would say yes, extremely important, for the same reason. If you have a fact-based worldview of today, you might have a chance to understand what's coming next in the future. We're going back to these 2 humps in 1975, that's when I was born, and I selected the West. That's the current EU countries and North America. Let's now see how the rest and the West compares in terms of how rich you are. These are the people who can afford to fly abroad with an airplane for a vacation. In 1975, only 30% of them lived outside EU and North America. But this has changed, okay? So first let's look at the change up till today, 2014. Today it's 50-50. The Western domination is over as of today. That's nice. So what's going to happen next? Do you see the big hump? Did you see how it moved? I did a little experiment. I went to the IMF, International Monetary Fund website. They have a forecast for the next 5 years of GDP per capita. So I can use that to go 5 years into the future, assuming the income inequality of each country is the same. I did that, but I went even further. I used those 5 years for the next 20 years with the same speed, just as an experiment, what might actually happen. Let's move into the future. In 2020, it's 57% in the rest. In 2025, 63%, 2030, 68%, and in 2035, the West is outnumbered, okay, in the rich consumer market. These are just the projections of GDP per capita into the future. 73% of the rich consumers are going to live outside North America and Europe. So yes, I think it's a good idea for a company to use this certificate to make sure they make fact-based decisions in the future. Thank you very much.
We live in the best time. We carry the knowledge of the world in our pocket. It's amazing. I marvel at that every day. We make our own climate at home, and we take it with us when we go out in our cars. 25 years ago, almost nobody had air conditioning in our cars. We need to realize how fortunate we are to be alive now. And we need to help make the world a better place, because there still are a lot of people who are extremely poor, even in the United States, in Warren County, and isolated places around the world. So remember, since 1800, extreme poverty has decreased from almost everybody, 85%, down to 10%. It's an unbelievable change, and something that very few people are aware of. Don't have a clue. But that still leaves a billion people in extreme poverty. And the fact that 300,000 of them were lifted out of poverty today doesn't make the news, but it's important to be aware and appreciative of. In conclusion, I hope you learned some new things about some very positive things that have been going on in our world for the past 2 centuries that hasn't got nearly enough press. Don't feel bad if you did worse than the chimps. If you got 0 or 1, the chimps beat you. If you got 2, you about tied with them. If it makes you any feel better, only about 9% of people who have taken this test do better than the chimps. A couple of books that I used are Factfulness by Hans Rosling, 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. Easily read book, very interesting, very nice man. And Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. That book is the best book I've read in the last 10 years. And I think a lot of you would find it very interesting.
Thank you, John, for sharing your encouraging and hopeful thoughts with us today. As part of our responsible search for truth and meaning, we encourage thoughtful discourse. And so, all are invited to stay in this Zoom meeting after the service ends and join one of the sermon discussion rooms with Dr. Downey. Our congregation and the work we do is supported by the voluntary generosity of all who contribute. While we listen to the offertory music, we invite you to go to the website shown on the screen and donate there, or to write a check and prepare it for mailing. Our community is strengthened by sharing with each other. If you have a significant joy or sorrow you wish to share, please type it into the chat box. We thank you for these gifts. May we use them wisely in the service of our congregation and community. If you are interested in learning more about Unitarian Universalism and the UU Church of Bowling Green, please contact us. As always, you can find more community news by reading the monthly newsletter and the weekly email update. Our website and our Facebook page are always available online. Throughout this week, let us be mindful of the joys and concerns of others, shared and unshared, by holding them in our minds and in our hearts, and by offering a helping hand.
Remember your math. An antidote is not a trend. Remember your history. The fact that something is bad today doesn't mean it was better in the past. Keep some perspective. Not every problem is a crisis, plague, epidemic, or existential threat. And not every change is the end of this, the death of that, or the dawn of a post-something era. Don't confuse pessimism with profundity. Problems are inevitable, but problems are solvable. The story of human progress is truly heroic. We will never have a perfect world, and it would be dangerous to seek one. But there is no limit to the betterments we can attain if we continue to apply knowledge to enhance human flourishing. For it requires only the convictions that life is better than death. Health is better than sickness. Abundance is better than want. Happiness is better than suffering. And knowledge is better than superstition and ignorance. Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now.
As our gathering ends, we will extinguish the flame in our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. Go with peace, go with happiness, go with hope, go with optimism. Please join in singing our closing hymn, Love Will Guide Us.
Hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us.